We have another awesome Story Geeks topic today coming from my man, George, down here. He said he had a really cool topic. It is, what about those movies that didn't do well in the box office, but later on became cult classics? What movies do we like that fit into that category, and what makes some of them really good and stand the test of time when they didn't do all that well in the actual box office? So all of that today on the Story Geeks Show. So before we jump into this topic, let me go down to George first. And George, before you introduce yourself and before you tell everybody where they can find you, tell us a little bit about what inspired this particular idea for a show.
Well, it started I feel like every time I turn around and I see people having discussions of movies and what is what's the talk of the town, so to speak, in the moment. And I've noticed that a lot of people were talking about kind of diving in a little bit into the theme park space where with Universal, where they kept on mentioning Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice kept on coming into the conversation of saying, okay, what would be a great IP that can replace this or put in here? And I thought that was quite interesting because this was a sequel that they were talking, Beetlejuice, that just came out recently, to a movie that it fits a certain demographic, but if you look at the numbers of when it first was released, it wasn't what you call a cultural phenomenon at the box office, but It grew legs where people enjoyed Beetlejuice. And then many years later, you have a sequel with practically majority of the same cast. You know, you have Michael Keaton, you have Winona Ryder, you have Catherine O'Hara, and it just kind of stirred up the pot. And it was like, that's quite interesting. And then it got me thinking, they kind of did the same thing with Hocus Pocus. You know, the original came out in 1993. They made a direct film on Disney Plus with Bette Midler, Kathy Najimy, and Sarah Jessica Parker. And it's like, and then they have the stage show for the Halloween party, and you have Minnie, Clarabelle, and Daisy dressed as the Sanderson sisters. And I'm like, wow, okay, so then I started going down the line and started doing a little bit of my own research of what defines a good movie, in spite of what the numbers are at the box office. And some of the movies that we love today, you don't really realize how much they kind of sucked at the box office.
Well, yeah.
And one of the movies was Austin Powers, the first Austin.
No way.
It only made about domestically $54 million. That was it. And then when it got into The Spy Who Shagged Me and Goldmember, it took on a mind of its own. And you had this awesome kind of slapstick trilogy knockoff of 007, so to speak. And then, of course, a movie that we all love on this channel, Office Space. You know, we quote it, you know, we show clips and audio and everything. But if you go back and look at its release, you know, a lot of people didn't really see it, you know, but if you mention Office Space in today's time, there's a demographic for it. You know, there's the Funko Pops, you know, the bobbleheads, all the memorabilia that has the memes. So it has a life of its own. So as I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, wow, there's a lot of movies that I feel is being talked about even today that have more relevance now than movies that made a lot of money that no one cares about. OG, you had mentioned before we started recording Transformers. Transformers made millions and millions of dollars. Is anyone really having a conversation about it? I don't think so.
Right.
Well, yeah, exactly. So it's very interesting, but yeah, Jay, we'll dive in, but I'll let you take over.
We're going to dive in. George, before we dive in, tell the folks where they can find you.
Absolutely. You can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Disney George. You can also find me on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky under the Disney Italiano. And of course, you can find me on my home base on Orange Grove 55 with Citrus Corner with all that sweet, juicy, but sometimes sticky Disney news and info. And also, please check out my new YouTube channel, Citrico Central, where it's basically the sister channel to Orange Grove 55, where we dive into, instead of podcast form, we're actually on location in the parks, whether there's an event going on or just in the parks, chilling out, having a chit chat. So it's always a good time. And a few videos are up now. So definitely like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell.
There it is. Now, tell me something before I go to OG. Citrico Corner. I know that there's a restaurant called Citrico's. I've never eaten there. Is that what you're referring to, or is there something else that you're referring to?
So originally, because my segment here on Orange Grove 55 was Citrus Corner,
Right.
So it was actually our good friend, Mr. Webba, that came up with the original title, which was Citrus Central. And there are some, every time like I would like punch it in, someone actually else has that name. And even though it's not really active, I still wanted something original. So went back to Ebba again and I gave an idea, like saying like, try to think of something of your like your Italian heritage or what have you. Now, even though Citrico is Spanish, but pretty close, you know.
Well, and this is the thing about Ebba. Big shout out to Ebba. He's actually got something premiering on this channel on Saturday, right? Ebba's a really creative dude, right? Really creative dude. But the Citrico thing for George's channel was perfect because George was saying technically he's right. It's Spanish, right? Yeah. But Citrico Central, like you could make it Italian though, and it sounds Italian even though it technically isn't, right? But it sets it apart from Citrus Corner here on the channel. It sounds, there's a little more spice to it, right? And it just worked. I'm like, Ebba, freaking genius, bro. Freaking genius.
And Citrico is a restaurant down at Walt Disney World.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah. So it ties to that as well. So
perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Ebba's like the in rap terms, he's like the ghostwriter, man. Like he's always out there like really cool ideas and like, really smart, really smart.
That's amazing. Shout out to Ebba. So OG, tell the folks where you're from.
I am from Compton, California. No, I am from, all kidding aside, I am from Orange Grove 55 here on YouTube. You can find me on X. I don't really go on X that much, except to talk to these gentlemen on the DMs, basically. But you can find me there, Orange Grove 55. And you can find me on Instagram, Orange Grove 55.
Yes. Well done. You can always find me on How Stories Work with Jay Sherer. I've been posting some new videos over there. My new concept is basically I am creating my own film school by going through and really studying scenes and films and whatever. And if you want to study alongside me and learn how to be better at writing, storytelling, directing, whatever it is related to filmmaking, follow me over on How Stories Work with Jay Sherer. And today we're going to dig into some stories. So we're going to talk about stories that did not do well at the box office, but have become cult classics. Now, before we define what some of our favorite are, right? And I have a whole list that I've got that I'm going to refer to in a minute here, because there's one in particular that I really liked that I didn't realize performed so poorly at the box office. Before we get into that, what are some of your favorite films that definitely classify as cult classics, even if they did okay at the box office? What are some things that you're like, you know what, that's a cult classic in my eyes because like it's really meaningful to me if I look back into my history? What do you think, George? What are some of the movies that pop into mind?
One of my top, which I think, I don't know if it's the top, but like in the category of cult classic, would be a Goofy movie.
Oh, that's a great movie.
So it's like whether it, and I don't know the exact number for a Goofy movie, but I know that it wasn't like a phenomenal hit. I think it did more well during the video kind of sales when it came out on VHS. And I just really dated myself because a lot of people don't even know what a VHS is nowadays. But it just sort of became like, I didn't think of it at the time. Oh, this is going to have, you know, legs and kind of have like this expanding kind of demographic of people that are going to love this. I just love the movie because it screams 90s to me. And I was a 90s kid growing up. And it was just, it had like the 90s, like kind of pop music and everything. And it just tells a great story of a beloved Disney character that existed in time over decades, but no one really knew the core story behind Goofy. And we started kind of getting a little bit of his background with Goof Troop. But the Goofy movie kind of excels that and how he wants to go on this father-son trip with Max and kind of like restore that bond between father and son. And you kind of see the heart that Goofy has, because a lot of times when you see Goofy, it's just either like the how-to, like how to fish and how to play football and how to ski, and it was always this kind of slapstick kind of quirkiness of Goofy, which you get that in the film, but that'll always be Goofy. Goofy will always be Goofy, but you see another side of him with emotion.
Yes,
and the thing definitely drew to me with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that I love about a Goofy movie is that, well, number one, we actually did a live show. I think it was just for members like a few months ago. And we were talking about really attractive animated characters. And I said Peg, his wife, Pete's wife, Peg. I mean, body for days, right? No, but
I'm going to look this up because I can't remember this character.
Yeah, Peg. No, but she's thick, but yeah. But no, but in all seriousness, Goofy movie though is interesting because when you ask me about Disney animation, right?
That's a 90s style right there too, man. Peg's got 90s style. Go Google Peg and you'll see the 90s style.
Absolutely, the hair and everything. Yeah. But the thing if you were to ask me with Disney animation in general, right? I would tell you Disney animation has to go timeless. You don't want to date yourself, right? Because you fall into the Oliver and Company trap, which Oliver and Company is a very 80s thing. You watch that movie, it screams 80s, 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 you know? Right. And because of that, I think it hasn't really aged well, particularly. And so it's not as timeless, and it hasn't really worked over the generations like say a Little Mermaid or a Snow White or Pinocchio, which are more timeless, and you can watch those movies anytime, and they never really age. So with Disney animation in general, I'm a real big proponent of like keep the modern out of it and have it be these timeless stories, and you can have these films really forever. They never really get old. Beauty and the Beast is another perfect example of that. Goofy movie really does kind of buck that trend though. Right? Because Goofy movie, like George was saying, leans into the 90s like hard. Like it's all in on the 90s. Yeah. It leans in on it, I think, so much that it works. Yeah. It really works. And now we're well beyond that era, obviously, of that time period. So, but now it's almost like this fun little time capsule to go back and look at it, and the music and the whole thing. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Like I said, Oliver and Company, not so much. No one really cares about that franchise. Very dated. Goofy movie though leaned into it in a fun way, in a kind of like an all chips in kind of way, and I think it really does work. And I think that's part of its success. And I absolutely love that movie, and I'm really honestly surprised that it has stood the test of time like it has. I mean, it's exceeded my expectations when it comes to that. Because on paper, you would think it would become another Oliver and Company or another one of those dated kind of things, right? Okay, you might refer back to it here and there, but it's never going to have the relevance of like some of these more timeless stories. But really, Goofy movie, it's pretty relevant. I mean, relevant enough where on Tuesday, George and I are going to Disneyland for 90s night. I mean, and
you guys are going? That's awesome.
We're going, and Goofy movie is a big part of that whole thing. I think they're gonna they have a popcorn bucket or something for a power line or something.
They do have a popcorn bucket of Max dressed as Power Line, and
no way.
I'm tempted. I might get that.
Oh yeah, he's tempted. He's buying it, Jay.
As soon as George says he's tempted, it's done.
Yeah.
Two things about Goofy movie for me. And actually, my film shares a lot with Goofy movie, is what you're talking about, George. One, how many kids that love this movie do you think now understand that Powerline is supposed to be Michael Jackson?
Right.
Because there's no way you get that reference unless you knew back in the 80s and 90s how giant Michael Jackson was at the time, and what they're trying to kind of communicate through what he's doing is pretty crazy. I think a lot of kids probably don't even get that reference. Of course, Michael Jackson is, had his problems, allegedly. But it's really fascinating. Now, I made a giant mistake because I also love a Goofy movie. I think a Goofy movie, one of the reasons it stands the test of time is because of how funny it is. I think it's really, really funny.
Yeah. And there's a lot of heart too in that movie. And I had told my wife, who had not seen it, I'm like, dude, you've never seen a Goofy movie? We have to watch a Goofy movie. And for some stupid reason, instead of picking a Goofy movie, I picked the sequel, which is nowhere near as good.
movie.
Yeah, extremely goofy movie. And we were watching it. I'm like, I don't think this is the movie. And she's like, yeah, this is not that great. I'm like, bummer. And then of course I realized afterwards, but now I can't get her to watch it because she's like, I don't believe you. I don't even know if you have good taste. So anyway, the Goofy movie is really, really good, and it's very funny. And it's one of those movies where when you saw it as a kid, you went, I really like this movie and I would like to show it to other people. Right. And it works on so many levels. So that's a great choice. OG, what do you got? What is your favorite box office flop that became a cult classic?
Yeah, I have one in particular. I don't know if you'd call it a cult classic, but Disney is really the king of taking their IP, right? Whether the movie flops or not, and turning that IP into a cash cow eventually, because they got all these, we talk about all the time with Seymour on the channel, right? The flywheel.
Yep.
All these other opportunities to sort of make money on that one thing. So if you make, if Paramount makes a movie, it really has like maybe 1 or 2 chances to make that thing work. Disney has so many chances through its theme parks, its cruise lines, the whole 9 yards, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of these early Walt Disney films did not do well. And it would surprise people because they have become fixtures in our pop culture kind of space, right? So one of my favorite movies really is Pinocchio, the 1940s Pinocchio. Yeah. I think it's a beautiful movie. I think it has some of the most beautiful backgrounds that Disney has ever done. I mean, it completely holds itself up against even like CGI stuff. I mean, what these artists did by hand is nothing short of a miracle. I loved it. And that movie did not do well. It flopped at the box office. It absolutely flopped. And through that Disney flywheel of all those generations, how Walt would incorporate, Pinocchio and like Jiminy Cricket especially. He was everywhere on TV, right? He was like hosting stuff, right? Like all that good stuff, right? And it really did become more and more popular as it went on. And through like re-releases in theaters and like VHS and like Laserdisc, right? And like, now streaming and all this stuff that they have in the parks. I mean, it's made its money back a bajillion times over again, but that's just one example. But Disney really they are like the king at doing this, where they can take a franchise that really didn't do that well, a film, and they can turn it into a cash cow for literally forever. From merchandise sales in the parks and all kinds of stuff, So
not to mention the main song of that film is basically the anthem of the company.
Yes.
It's used for like the beginning to all the Disney films with the logo. They play it on the Disney Cruise Line with the horn battles when you hear the "When You Wish Upon a Star."
Yeah.
And it's just like one of those things you don't really think about to say, oh, okay, that song's from Pinocchio. But in all reality, like we all know Pinocchio, obviously, because we're Disney fans and we're movie buffs. But for someone to just go back and say, well, how much money did Pinocchio make? Oh, look at that. That movie tanked, which it did.
It did.
But I think it's all on the execution of how you then take the IP and go beyond even to how its release is. I think if you just leave it and it stagnates, and I feel like that's what went wrong with Treasure Planet and Atlantis. It's like Disney was like, okay, well, they flopped at the box office, and this was around the time that 2D animation was kind of, I hate to say it, as like a dying art form, because CGI animation was like it was the GOAT at the time, and it was everyone wanted a piece of it, whether it was in DreamWorks, whether it was Disney, Pixar, kind of led into that. And it was like, okay, well, but now I'm starting to see like even in certain aspects, which I'm kind of hoping, because I would love to see Treasure Planet and Atlantis kind of get a revitalization. I actually love those films. And speaking of that kind of goes, I'm going to actually take it over a little bit to Universal, because there is a movie that I've watched, and I don't even think you would even call it a cult classic. I don't think nobody's talking about it. It's probably still dead in the water, no pun intended, because the movie that I actually liked, that I watched because I went to Universal Hollywood and I seen the stunt show, was Waterworld.
Oh yeah.
I never seen the movie. I've just heard people saying, and it was one of Universal's biggest blunders of how much they ramped this thing up,
right,
and the budget on that thing, and it just like lost them money. But then I saw the stunt show, and I'm like, you know what? This is a damn good stunt show. It's like, now I'm curious to see the movie. So I ended up watching the movie, and I actually enjoyed it.
Well, I mean, look at Disneyland, where you have an attraction based on the Wind in the Willows. I mean, what Gen Zer knows what that movie is?
Right.
You know, Mr. Toad. I mean, come on, you know. But the attraction is very popular, right?
Yeah.
You know, so but see, Disney of yesteryear used to take a little more risk with that stuff. Like with Walt, when Pinocchio didn't do well, he still utilized Jiminy Cricket in like literally everything. And so that franchise was able to live on because you were saying, George, he didn't let it just sit in the vault and just collect dust like, you know, Black Cauldron and like, you know, so many of these flops. He kept it out there, you know, and that was smart. It paid off. Another big one that Disney did was Fantasia. Another flop. People didn't get it. People still don't get that movie. Oh, I'm going to watch it. What is this? You know, there's no story, you know, a lot of people don't like Fantasia, but Fantasia ended up being, I mean, there was so much stuff from that film, like Sorcerer Mickey. I mean, that's literally the logo for Walt Disney Imagineering is that character, Sorcerer Mickey. That was the first time we saw Mickey Mouse with the modern eyes, with like the pupils with the white. First time we saw him like that. They updated his look, and that was the first time we saw him. Big show at Disneyland. Fantasmic is heavily based on Fantasia. You know, the brooms holding the buckets of water. Everyone knows what those are from Fantasia, you know? So that movie made a big impact years and years and years and years after its initial release. But in theaters, it flopped. Walt Disney, surprisingly, for as brilliant as he was, had a lot of failure on his watch, you know, but he kept going. And that's why I think he did so well.
That's awesome. I'm going to go back to Universal in a second because my cult classic, which we're going to define what cult classic means, by the way. We're going to do that in a minute too. But I'm going to take you to Universal, but I want to just mention one thing before we go there. I started watching a channel that I would love to get on this show. Not on the Story Geeks, but on the OG55 channel. They're called Views and Cues, and I don't know if you guys have seen this couple, but I came across them because they had a video that was one of the best YouTube titles that I have ever seen in my entire life. The title of the video was "Two Lame Introverts Go on a Virgin Voyages Cruise," and because Virgin Voyages is like no kids, and it's like when they first started promoting it, it seemed like a very like party kind of like booze cruise type of a thing. Yeah. And so this title was like, yeah, what is it for like someone like us who isn't like super party oriented and like just going crazy? What is it like to go on a cruise? But they go on a bunch of cruises. So if you guys ever want to talk cruises, please get Views and Cues on here because they're absolutely phenomenal. And I just keep watching all the rest of their videos. They're really great.
I'll reach out to them.
Do it. It'll be really fun. Okay, so we're going to define cult classic, but before we do that, I'm going to tell you what my choice is. And I think if you take a little bit, we're going to get a little bit deeper into why we chose these three things as well. Okay. But I would choose a movie that George has maybe never heard of because he didn't grow up in Southern California. OG, you might know this. It used to play on KTLA, Channel 5 back in the day when I was a kid. Used to have this like 80s throwback movies on like I believe it was either Friday or Saturday night. And if you didn't have anything else to do as a kid, you'd be like, all right, I guess I'm watching whatever they're showing me, right?
Yeah.
And they used to run a movie that technically was a box office flop. It made $3.8 million at the box office. It cost $4 million to make. So technically lost money. But this movie, in the people that I'm around, in the culture that I grew up in, this movie is quoted all the time by the people in this surf industry culture kind of thing. And it's a movie called North Shore. And the movie was about a kid who won a surf contest in a wave pool in Arizona. And in winning the contest, he got a free plane ticket to go surf in Hawaii. And he's a total kook in Hawaii. But what they do is they kind of like embrace him. Some people take him under their wing. He starts to get a crush on a local Hawaiian girl. He then comes up against I believe it was what is it? The Dahui, I think, is what he was faced against, this group of locals who basically hate his guts, kind of like, and it's about him training to go into the pipeline contest, the bonsai pipeline contest, right? No one calls it the bonsai pipeline anymore, but in the 80s it was called the bonsai pipeline, and we all watched it that way. And there's just so many quotable lines in there, because there was one local guy who was a total like stoner kid, and he would just say the dumbest things, like he goes, "Hey, you need to train me, like how am I supposed to surf these waves?" And the guy's like, "When the wave breaks there, don't be there." It's like, it's just stupid stuff, dude. That movie was so great. So I think that one of the things that I'm hearing as I listen to both of you talk that was true for me is, and this is really true of art in general. Art can, and I will tell you, North Shore is an objectively bad movie. Like, it's not like it's a low budget, not very good film, right? However, it struck a chord with people who were growing up in the 80s. I would have been like 6 years old when this came out but I'm watching it in the 90s because I'm watching it, on KTLA. I hadn't seen the box office. I didn't even know it came out as a movie. And it struck a chord because it was aspirational for us, or it was like, oh, I kind of feel like I would love to be in this kind of environment. I kind of want to be like this. So like, George, I can see as a kid growing up in the 90s, for this, like the power line to like the connections with the dad on the trip and like all that kind of stuff. I can see somebody going like, I really resonated with this. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad. I resonate with it. There's something about it that for me personally, it's meaningful to me, right? It doesn't have to be good. It can be really stupid, but there's still something meaningful in it. And so I'm wondering if either of you find that is true. So for me with North Shore, it's not that I found anything deeply meaningful, but I associated myself with the culture that was showcased in this movie. I'm a white kid from LA, or from Los Angeles area.
Yeah.
Growing up loving to go to the beach, and here's a kid from Arizona that's trying to go to Hawaii. I want to go to Hawaii. When I remember having been to Hawaii, I remember going and being like, this is so epic. Like, all of the surf heroes are here. Like, this is amazing, right? And having, so kind of like, I guess if I was older, I would have picked Point Break instead. but that was like, maybe I think rated R, so I couldn't see it until later. But that was cool to me, and it was something approachable because North Shore was a little bit more of it was unlike Point Break, which is kind of intense and like an action movie. North Shore is almost more like a kid's movie. It's just kind of cheesy. You know what I mean? Like, and it's cheesy in the way that you, as a kid, you're like, I don't really care that it's cheesy. It's just kind of cool. Whereas an adult, you'd be like, this is not good dialogue. You know what I mean? Like,
oh, totally. And I didn't see that movie, but here's the thing, Jay. Back in the 80s, I used to be a skateboarder. I mean, like most kids in the 80s.
Shred the gnar, bro.
Exactly. And like I would wear like the Vision streetwear, you probably remember that. George has no idea. There's no idea. Totally before your time, George. Totally before your time. And like the TNC surf designs.
Oh, dude, TNC surf designs was dope.
With the gorilla that looked like Donkey Kong kind of.
Yeah.
And the whole thing, that stuff was fun. But I used to watch like skater videos. Back then, and stuff like people going through the half pipe and all that stuff. So that culture was huge back then. It was absolutely huge. Massive. And then I think it was like in the early 90s. And George, this is right up your alley. Yeah, I'm sure you remember this because George is a Disney guy. The Ocean Girl. Do you remember her?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that goes way back. I barely remember that.
Yeah. I used to like Ocean Girl. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, I don't remember North Shore, but I remember that kind of culture of that time though, Jay. It was awesome.
It was huge.
Absolutely awesome.
Yeah. So my question to you guys is, from the movies that you picked, what do you think about it resonated with you?
I think for me, like if I was to watch a Goofy movie, say the first time in today's time, I would think it's a funny movie. I would think it was a really good movie. I don't know if it would have the same impact as it does on me now because I had seen it as a kid growing up in the 90s. Like I watched it in the 90s. So I guess it's that nostalgia feeling that when I go back to it and I watch the film and I hear the music and I see the characters like in that natural like kind of setting in the 90s where Max has like the red hoodie with the baggy jeans, and I mean, it takes me back to that moment where it was like, I'm sorry, and call me 90s biased, but I'm sorry, growing up in the 90s was the shit. Like,
oh dude, the 90s was an amazing decade.
Amazing.
Yes.
The 90s straddled. It was kind of weird because the 90s took like Walt's era kind of, right? Of like the World War like what, 2 generation ish or whatever. And they took the modern, like when the boomers got older.
Yeah.
And they it was like that perfect hybrid, right? Where it's like the cartoons of like, like Animaniacs and Tiny Toons were like of that Looney Tunes era of like the 50s, right? But yet they were like the 90s more modern version of that. But it was that perfect balance of nostalgia and new.
Yeah.
And like same with like Disney, where like Beauty and the Beast was like, it could easily be a Walt film.
Yep.
But it was like fresh enough where it was still modern.
Yeah.
And the 90s constantly did that with the content, where it was just like that. It was that perfect balance of like that pre-boomer age and the boomers as they got older. I loved it.
Well, the 90s also had this really unique time period where the 80s, like if you go back and watch 80s movies, there's a lot more objectionable material in 80s movies than there are in 90s movies, because the moral majority and the Democrat Party in Tipper Gore both were like, no, families are the most important. That has not been true for the course of human history. Sometimes things become more popular, sometimes things become less popular. But in the 90s, it was like, families are super important, protect the kids, show kids stuff. It was not so much this kind of thing where it was like, kids were, I think, a lot more the focus. Let's put it that way, right? I'm not saying they're not the focus today, but it was just that it was a unique time in history where it was really good to be a kid.
Oh,
now, I'm sure that's not true for everybody, but for me, it was a great, just like you said, George, it was a great time to be a kid. And I was in the 90s, I was born in the early 80s, so in the very early 80s. So in the 90s for me were like a great time to grow up. It was amazing.
It was perfect. And even in the 90s, even Vegas was trying to get into the family.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
And they gave up on that. They're like, screw it. We're gonna lean into being raunchy now.
Yeah.
But like they tried though. They wanted to be the Disney in Nevada, basically,
There was a time when Vegas's slogan wasn't whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. It was more like, bring your kids to Treasure Island because there's a pirate show out here. Circus is fantastic. They even built a theme park out in I can't remember where it was. What the name of that theme park was. I can't remember the name of the hotel that the theme park was built in, but that was a big deal. Georgia got so offended. He's like, I'm out of here.
He's like, I'm out. Real quick, funny story.
Yeah.
When I was 18 years old,
Okay.
I went to the Las Vegas Hilton with my buddy Alan at the time. I still talk to Alan.
Nice.
Oh, George is back.
Shout out to Alan.
Oh, maybe not. Oh, the circle of death. He'll be back. Shout out to Alan, awesome dude. But anyway, we were out in Vegas for the Victor Awards, sports awards, which I don't care about sports, but I'm there for my friend Alan. We're just gonna hang out, right? And so we go to the Las Vegas Hilton, and we're young kids, man. We're like 17, 18 years old, right? So anyway, long story short, there's this really pretty, like this Latina. She got like this blonde hair, the whole thing, standing out there in the lobby, right? Just this random, like hot woman in the lobby by herself. Like it should have been like a red flag, right?
Yeah. right.
Just standing there, Yeah. And my friend Alan was like, we're like 17, 18 years old. We're busy, we're young. And I was telling my buddy Alan, because he was like looking at her, right? And I was like, Alan, come on, just go talk to her. Let's go talk to her, man. And he's never really approached, and he's kind of shy and nervous. Finally approaches this girl, and he finally comes out of his shell, right?
Yeah.
We go and talk to her, and she turns out to be a hooker named Norma Jean. I'm like, I was laughing so hard. I was like, this is so funny. Alan finally comes out of his shell. That is his woman named Norma Jean. That was so funny. You missed all the fun, George. Where have you been, brother?
Yeah. I swear, you think that I lived in a bunker. Like the connection is like...
That's wild.
I never had issues out here, though. Like I miss space. I don't know why.
That's wild.
So, G, what's the connection for you? Is there a connection that goes back for George as a kid, being a kid in the 90s, and being a kid in the 90s was awesome.
Yep.
For me, it was this surf culture aspect of what I really enjoyed and being able to see that on screen. What was it for Orange Grove 55?
Really quick,
Yeah.
before you answer that, because I wanted to mention something too, because Jay, you had mentioned something, about like kids growing up in today's time and what have you, and how the 90s, I feel like it is a different demographic during the time of the 90s of growing up to now, because I feel like, no offense to the younger generation now, but I feel like back in the day, we actually sat down and watched something from beginning to end, where in today's time, it's just like a constant go, and everything has to be kind of shorthand, so to speak, and in shorts and clips and all that. And I feel like that then hurts to create new memories and nostalgia for film with the newer generation, because I feel like a lot of times they don't sit and watch and pay attention to what they're looking at on screen. It's either they get fidgety, they get up, they walk away, or they're looking on their iPad or their video game hand device. And it's like, the 90s was such a
it's a possibility that when the kids from this generation are our age, they might be like, Mr. Beast was awesome. I loved watching Mr. Beast, right? Which we didn't have any of that. There was no such thing as going on. My wife and I were talking about this the other day, because the TV at the places we were staying would occasionally start loading YouTube videos. And I was like, this is so annoying. But when I grew up, you used to go click on a photo on dial-up internet, and it would load this portion, this portion, then this portion, and every little bit would load a little bit more. And I'm like, wow, we've really come a long way to where this is so annoying, because I have to wait a half a second for this thing to glitch and then come back. So it's a totally different time. So there's probably going to be a completely different thing. Yeah. So OG, what do you think? What did you connect with Pinocchio?
Okay, so
you're a bold liar, and you needed to learn your lessons.
Exactly. That's exactly it. No, actually, it's funny because okay, so I have this YouTube channel, Orange Grove 55, right? We talk mostly about theme park stuff. I mean, to be honest, but we do a lot of studio stuff as well, right?
Sure.
But the thing that got me really into Disney, and I've said this a few times on the channel, wasn't the theme parks. It was always the animation. That was the thing that really sparked my love for Disney. So when I was a kid, I was fascinated by animation, and Pinocchio in particular, I loved it because, like I said before, like with the beautiful backgrounds, the story, I loved it. I loved what it did for the company, like what George was saying with the, I love that, how it went on to become kind of like the anthem of the company, and I just fell in love with it. Yeah, I mean, just being a big animation fan, I would literally sit in my room as a kid and watch like these animation specials, like the making of like Beauty and the Beast, the making of Lion King, the making of Pinocchio, and just watch all the hours and hours and hours and hours. So Pinocchio was just such a beautiful film, and I just really resonated with it as being like a young animation fan. I could really appreciate it on that level, and it just stuck with me. Yeah, that one in particular, I just thought it was a beautiful movie. It's sad that it flopped, but it did have its redemption arc. It's back.
I think that's what people should gear more towards film moving forward. They should go by the art and the craft of the film itself. It's like, do you love this film enough to say, you know what, this is worth a watch? This is something to encourage people to say, you should check this out. It's like immediately, especially now, as we were talking about, like with technology and social media, it's like the second a movie comes out, boom, we go and look at the box office numbers, which I'm guilty of that. I go and I look at the box office numbers just because I'm curious to see what it does for opening weekend, what it does domestically, what it does internationally, worldwide, all that good jazz. But that still will not stop me from going to see a movie or watch a movie if I'm interested in. There's a movie that's going to be coming out, I believe, March 14th. It's called, I think it's called Black Bag. Abby and I saw a preview of it when we went to go see Captain America, and it sparked my interest. Now, I know a movie like that may not make big numbers at the box office, but it very well may be a good movie. Or if it isn't such a good movie, it has nothing to do with the numbers. It's just a movie that just doesn't speak to me.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm going to define cult classic and have you guys react to it. Sure. Because I think that we've actually kind of defined it in a way, right? Because if you were to say, So let's define what cult is first, right? A cult is a group of people who have a shared belief system about something, and there are rules to the behavior of the cult, right? So now, obviously, you can take that to the religious standpoint and talk about religion and cults, but if you just keep it to that brief definition of like people, you have OG, who's part of the Disney cult, so to speak. You have George, who's part of the Disney 90s cult, and you have Jay as a part of this like surf culture adjacent kind of cult, right? And so I think that there's something to the idea, and you actually brought up Beetlejuice to begin, George. That was part of the sort of gothic cult that existed, right? There was the Goths were a thing. I mean, they still are a thing. In fact, there's still Goth days at Disneyland, which are amazing, and Bats days, which are fantastic. In fact, I saw my cousins there one day because they're super into that, and I was like, "Hey, what's up, guys?" And they're like, they're totally gothed out, which is awesome. But so I think that cult refers to a set of behaviors that we associated with in some way, shape, or form. And then classic just means that when we look back on it and we don't see it for what it might mean objectively speaking for being good or bad. We look back and say, wow, I really found something in that where I found familiarity. I found aspirations. I found, like, oh, geez, you talk about that. What it sounds like to me is you then aspired to be like a Disney fan of this art form that other people weren't seeing at the time. Maybe it was like, yeah, Pinocchio didn't do that well, but like for me it was meaningful, and the art that was being showcased on screen really meant something to me, right? And George, for you it's same.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about all the time on the channel with The Little Mermaid. You know, George is always saying they should get rid of The Little Mermaid ride at DCA, right? Yeah. And I'm like, don't you dare touch that ride. I love The Little Mermaid. Don't you touch that ride. No, but in all seriousness, though, The Little Mermaid was kind of similar to me as Pinocchio. Now, Little Mermaid did very well in the box office. It really did rejuvenate the Walt Disney Company. But The Little Mermaid, for me, is such a special film because of what it did for Disney. Because I love this company. I love what Walt started, right? And then it also, Howard Ashman is one like I look up to Howard Ashman. I think he's an amazing human being. I mean, what he did for music and just pop culture in general. So that those elements. Now, obviously, Little Mermaid's a great movie. You know, it's really great, but those things, the Howard Ashman element, what it did for Disney, how it sparked the Renaissance era, right? All the nerdy stuff that we love. That's why that movie means so much to me, right? So it's like, it's kind of interesting how we kind of place these importances on these things where an average person probably does. Like, you know, the soccer mom's not thinking like that, right? But like
Absolutely.
As nerds, we take on a whole different like level of like, you know, observation, I think, right?
That's right. By the way, I think we should do a deep dive, a Story Geeks deep dive into Pinocchio sometime, because that story is really fascinating how that plays out and what it means and what it's trying to tell us. It's really interesting. I
would agree, and I would love to do that, because the thing I've said it so many times too, the thing that I loved about Walt back then, especially back then, like animation, I think back then was considered kind of like gags and like kids stuff, really, right? And Walt didn't really care. He was like, no, I'm making a dark film. I'm making Pinocchio. This is dark. You know, we're going to turn the kids into donkeys. It's a scary movie, you know? It's a scary movie. Bambi, I'm going to shoot the mother, and it's going to be like, I mean, he did stuff that he wasn't trying to sugarcoat these films for the kids in the audience. He didn't talk down to kids. He was like, you know what? I think kids can handle this. I think Disney nowadays can learn a few things from that, because I think Eisner got that down. He understood that with Lion King and all this stuff, right? He like doubled down on that stuff, right?
He really got it.
Yep. But nowadays, I don't really see that. I think they're a little scared to do that, but I think it's important. I really do. But
And it's really fascinating too to see what Walt did. We're getting off cult classics now a little bit, but it's really fascinating to see what Walt did with taking stories that existed in literature and transforming them into an Americanized version for the 50s and 60s and prior to as well. But there was this because he did not just take the fairy tales and put the fairy tales on screen. He adapted them for the audience that he was trying to reach, which was primarily an American audience living in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And it changes the nature of the fairy tale. right? It's like not the same. It's not the same Pinocchio that you saw in the fairy tale. It's a different Pinocchio,
Right.
but it's still he did not back off of the nature of fairy tales of explaining something in a way that we can relate and find value in. He didn't back off of that. It was he just tweaked it. He just tweaked it for a different generation and a different time period, which is really fascinating.
Yeah.
So any reactions to my definition of cult classic? What do you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. It's interesting because I think that when you look at these films, like, for example, another one, a perfect example, Nightmare Before Christmas, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's
huge cult classic.
A huge cult classic. I mean, that one was really, that did not perform well at the box office. And now through, merchandise, we talk about goths. I mean, that means they're keeping that franchise very healthy. You know what I'm saying? It's massive. And the holidays at Disneyland with all that stuff and all that. So yeah, cult classics, I think it's something, like what you're saying, where it initially doesn't do well. It finds its audience later on. So it finds audience later on. So Nightmare Before Christmas, perfect example. Moana, even, I think, is a perfect example of that. That movie didn't really do that well in the box office because of the pandy. There was external circumstances, but it really got its legs once it hit like the streaming. I'm sorry, not Moana. What am I talking about? Encanto. I'm sorry. Encanto didn't do that well. Yeah, because of the pandy and all that, right? And then afterwards, as it got onto the streaming service and people were actually able to watch it, and it became a huge hit. Now it's one of Disney's biggest franchises. So, I think that at the heart, that's what a cult classic is. It's something that, like, initially maybe people were hesitant. It was a flop. People didn't want to see it. They were kind of poo-pooing it. And then as time went on, maybe they gave it a chance and they really fell in love with it, and it got bigger and bigger as time went on. So yeah. And Disney's really good at cultivating that kind of thing because of that flywheel. So in particular.
So I was looking at some other cult classics that just are films that, again, did not do well in the box office, but became something later on. And the one that comes up on just about every list that you will go look at, I think, is probably one of the best definitions of a cult classic that you might hear about. Now, it's not a Disney movie, I don't believe. Hang on a second. Let me see who made this movie. I don't want to tell you what it is until I figure out who did it.
Now, while you're looking that up, I have a question for you. Yeah. Do you consider Tron a cult classic, or has it not gained enough cultural relevance to sort of become that?
Oh no, I think it's a cult classic for sure.
For sure.
My dad showed it to me. By the way, this film that I'm going to talk about is a 20th Century Studios. So interesting there. Yeah, here's why. Here's why I think it's a cult classic. I remember that when I was a kid, my dad goes, "Oh, you guys got to see Tron." And we're like, "What, Tron? I don't know what you're talking about. Like, what is this all about?" And he goes, "Well, it's really futuristic, and it's really, like, some of the design on this thing is really cool." So to my dad, it was sort of like a movie that envisioned what the future of computers could be. You know what I mean? This is like, for us, that was probably the Matrix. But for my dad, it was Tron. Like Matrix and Tron are super similar in concept, to be honest. But I think it does reach cult classic status because, in my opinion, it was a movie. As soon as somebody says, "You've got to watch this movie because I used to watch it and I used to love it, even if it's not good by today's standards," that means that it's reached cult classic status for somebody. Right?
Yeah.
And so Tron, I think, was definitely that. I remember when I saw Tron for the first time, and I thought it was awesome. I mean, talk about give me a Frisbee, because I'm going to go throw a Frisbee around at my brother now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It was just cool.
And it's interesting, too, with a lot of these movies, how elements of those films become, like, popular. Like, like we talked about Pinocchio, where the song became a giant thing of its own, right? Yep. For Tron, the aesthetic, that Tron look, it's very much, and it's kind of interesting how that kind of works. Like certain elements kind of stick with the culture.
Well, and a lot of cult classics go on to almost define genre. So I still haven't given you the one that I'm going to talk about in a minute, because you will go like, that's a cult classic for sure. Yeah. But another one that people might not think about is Blade Runner. Blade Runner
Yeah,
did not
yeah.
make money at the box office, but Blade Runner is a quintessential film for all the other films that were made in this dystopian future of like maybe robots are among us, and like it's everything is not quite what it seems to be. I mean, I would argue that Blade Runner was so influential on the genre that it literally almost created its own genre. I know that
Right.
it existed in books and stuff like that, right? So don't get me wrong, like books took it on first. Well, I think the Blade Runner, what is it? Blade Runner's inspiration, when robots dream of electric sheep or whatever it is, something along those lines. Of the book by Philip K. Dick, I think, was inspiration for Blade Runner. But that's a movie that I think a lot of people would be shocked that it didn't do well at the box office. You had
Wow.
Harrison Ford was the star of it, coming off of Indiana Jones and Star Wars,
Right.
and people just didn't show up to the theater to see Blade Runner. But today, Blade Runner is looked at very fondly and is looked at as a, like, nobody's going to look at North Shore, my pick, and be like, what an Oscar caliber film, right? Like it's not a thing. But now Pinocchio, they would. Pinocchio, people would go, that's a legit film.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people would say, well, Goofy movie is maybe not an Oscar caliber film, but I love it and it's really meaningful to me, right?
Yeah.
But Blade Runner, I think people would be like, yeah, how did it not win an Oscar? I mean, there was like multiple things that it could have won an Oscar for that it was just amazing at. And by the way, I don't know, it might have won some Oscars. I'll have to look it up. But it definitely didn't do well at the box office. So surprisingly, that didn't.
That's wild. That's wild.
So here's my quintessential cult classic that you guys can respond to. It comes
Sure.
up in every single list. The Princess Bride.
Oh, interesting. You know what? I thought you were going to go with the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Oh, I did too, but that didn't show up on any of the lists, which is crazy.
That's wild. The princess. Oh, yeah,
see,
totally.
that came up on one of my lists. Was the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which, I mean, again, became a cult classic. And I mean,
yeah.
who wouldn't want to see Tim Curry in a corset and high heels? I mean,
Oh, totally. But George, well, I mean, George was stuck in the Tronverse, the Matrix. Welcome back. What do you think about Princess Diaries or Princess Bride? I'm sorry,
Princess Bride.
Okay. I love the Princess Bride, and actually, as I gotten older, I learned to appreciate the film for what it is, because I feel like I started watching it at a young age, but I didn't understand the storyline to it. I just watched it because you had like these really kind of cool creatures, so to speak, that always like it drew to my attention, but I didn't know what the hell was going on. It's sort of kind of like the Never-Ending Story. It was like I never really understood the plot line to it, but it was like you had these characters in Fantasia, you had the rock golem, you had Falcor, the mythical dragon, and what have you, and it was just something that drew to me. So the Princess Bride, but as I gotten older, I started to appreciate the value of how a good film can not be, it can be epic in a way, but not where it's like a big budget kind of film.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Another one too. Now, I don't know if this would be a cult classic because I don't know if people still talk about it, but Labyrinth with David Bowie.
Yeah, that came up on some of the lists I looked at. Yep.
That was an interesting movie. I used to like that with Jennifer. Is it Jennifer Connelly?
Jennifer Connelly, yeah.
She was a babe. She was a babe.
Dude, she was in Top Gun Maverick. And
she
still
was.
a babe.
Totally, yeah, absolutely.
Amazing.
Because I remember back in the 90s, because I used to have magazine cutouts like hanging on my wall of her. So
that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. Now, what about, guys, there's so many coming to my mind right now.
Yeah.
What about the Ninja Turtle, the live action movies?
Oh man, I loved those films as a kid, dude. They're again not going to win any Oscars ever, but as a kid, I thought that they were amazing.
Bro, me too. With the Vanilla Ice, the Go Ninja Go Ninja Go.
That's what I was just going to say. Like, I love
Secrets of the Ooze, dude.
Secret of the Ooze #2, I think, was the best.
Yeah.
Out of all of them, with Toka and Razor, and then you have that. Again, that 90s. See, I just love that 90s feel. See, I'm drawn to like films.
Weren't we going to do a Story Geeks on Secrets of the Ooze?
We have to do one. We have to do one.
I remember I watched it and I was like, I don't know how to ask deep questions in this movie because there's no deep questions in this film. It does not exist.
I think the only deep question you could possibly think is like, as a kid, I was wondering like, how do those like the heads work with like the animatronic like turtles? Okay, get a little deep into the mechanics, maybe. That's about it.
Right. Exactly. That's so funny. I love those. I think. To me, those definitely fit cult classic because there's something about those that again screamed 90s. Those films would. I have a hard time thinking that those films would be greenlit today.
Yeah,
there's so many films that were greenlit in the 90s that I can go back and go like, I loved that film. It was amazing. Blank Check, Heavyweights,
and that kid is
the
probably,
Big Green.
That kid's probably our age, bro. The Blank Check guy.
Oh, yeah, guaranteed. Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think that, but all of those films, I think would really struggle to get actually made in the modern environment, right?
Oh, yeah.
But in the 90s, those films were, again, I mean, talk about like Home Alone was actually a film that I believe made a lot of money. I mean, Home Alone was like, but that's a film that like my wife and I watched Home Alone and Home Alone 2 over the last couple of years. They're still phenomenal films. Like how that got greenlit and how it made that much money and it had such an impact on society is crazy.
Today, people would say, "What the hell is this?"
Exactly.
Like they would say, "Okay, this is a boy that's left home alone, antics about like the robbers and what have you." And there's people that would literally be sitting there was like, wow, shouldn't like CPS be called on the parent? Like,
oh gosh. Well, that movie wouldn't work nowadays because nowadays we have devices. We got our phones and stuff. You could call the kid and be like, where before it was like.
But even with Heavyweights, Jay, you mentioned Heavyweights, like making a movie like that, with like the fat shaming, so to speak, and you have a camp dedicated for obese or overweight boys, but they kind of played into that. They were like, yeah, I'm fat and I'm proud of it. Like, I don't care, and it was like, which actually Ben Stiller went on social media. He actually gave a shout out to Heavyweights because it celebrates its 30th anniversary. And he said that was a good time filming that a lot of people don't know about Heavyweights. But yeah, he actually got on social media for its 30th anniversary.
Heavyweights is one of those films. I totally agree with you. It could not be made today. But if you watch that film and don't understand the meaning of it, you just lost. You lose all credibility with me. Like that. The meaning of that film is, first of all, it's not saying that that your weight matters, your friendships matter, and who you choose to be your friends matters. And in fact, the guy who's getting on your case about the stuff is actually a big jerk, right? Because there's a way to have friendships, and there's a way to be able to make fun of each other, and then there's a way to not do that. And the way to not do that is the Ben Stiller character. Like, that's the guy who's like not cool. So for people who don't get the messages of films, I don't know what to tell you. Like,
yeah, no, 100%. And like, you're right. These films, like you take those 90s era Disney movies, so live action Disney movies. You take like Kid in King Arthur's Court.
Yeah.
And all, like you're saying, like the Blank Check, right?
The Big Green was one of my favorites, by the way.
The Big Green. These are movies it's like almost like its own genre.
Yeah.
Would never be done. Would never be made today. Disney doesn't make movies like that anymore.
Or if it does, it niches it down into Disney Plus algorithm that you and I will never see.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like the Disney Channel tab.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that there's a problem with that too. And that is that I think that when in the 90s, Disney was not just making movies for kids. I think you are seeing Disney do that now. Like, we're just going to make this thing for kids. I think Bluey gets a lot of attention, right? We talked about that with Alia all the time, like how much attention Bluey gets.
Yeah.
And I've heard adults finally start talking about Bluey and saying how much they love Bluey. That, I think, is uniquely a 90s thing. When they made Blank Check, they knew the parents are going to show up to it. In fact, I was talking to my dad because my nephew, who's 9, said, "Oh, I really want to watch this Blank Check movie." For whatever reason, I don't know why he said that. And my dad showed it to him, and my dad was like, "There's a bunch of movies in there that like there's a bunch of jokes in that movie that he's not getting." And I'm like, "I'm getting them. They're funny, like." So there's this component to when Disney made movies in the 90s, and this was like probably an Eisner overseen like level genius thing. It was like, we're gonna make movies for kids, but don't forget that the adults are there. And they're not going to be on their phones in the theater. They're not going to be distracted by anything. They have to watch this movie. So don't make it so the adults don't want to pay for it. Make sure you include some stuff that the adults will laugh. The adults will think it's cool. And I think they did that really, really well, which that turned it into more of a 4-quadrant type of film, as opposed to just like, oh, it's a kids movie that I'm not going to go to because it's for kids.
Yeah, Disney did that very well back then. And I would even say Warner Brothers too. Like with a lot of their animation, like, you could be an adult and watch Animaniacs and get a lot out of that.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Such good stuff.
There's one actually that you mentioned, the Animaniacs. There's one segment of that show that I absolutely love, but they would never dare to ever put it on children's television, and it was titled The Baghdad Cafe.
Oh man.
Yeah.
and back then, that was like during the Gulf War, or close to it, I believe. Not Animaniacs. That's pretty risque, even back then.
Yeah, even back then, they were like the Family Guy of our generation. What you guys made me think of something else I was going to bring up in regards to. I'll have to think of it. I'll have to think of it later. So what are some other cult classics? Let me read off a couple to you, and you tell me if any of these were meaningful to you. So here's one list. All of these were in the 80s, this particular list. Labyrinth is in there. We talked about Labyrinth a little bit. This is a hilarious one. And it has this. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Before I get to that, another cult classic from Disney that I think is actually a genius level show, because it did the same things that we were just talking about Blank Check doing. And I can tell you right now, if you go watch this show, you will love it. And that is Gravity Falls. Gravity Falls is not just for kids. If you think, oh, Gravity Falls is for kids. No. Gravity Falls is hilarious. It is fantastic. The church we go to, we do what's called small groups. And so we have people join the small group and they come over to our house and we talk about the Bible and things like that. And this younger couple came in and we were just chatting about like various stuff. And we were talking about our dogs. And I was talking about Gatsby. It's people that watch the channel. Some of you have seen Gatsby. He's our little corgi. Well, she goes, oh, well, my dog's name is Mabel. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And she's like, yeah, we got the Mabel because there's this TV show called Gravity Falls. I'm like, Gravity Falls? Gravity Falls is amazing. So if you're naming your dog after characters from a TV show that technically only went 2 seasons and then got basically canceled after that, that's cult classic for sure. And if you have not seen Gravity Falls, you need to stop what you're doing. Stop watching this. Well, finish watching this. Then go watch Gravity Falls because it is amazing.
See, I have a dog named Mickey, so I'm leaning into my pixie duster, like, shill.
That's right. That's right.
I might as well have a little Yorkie called Dana Walden or something. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, the first person who names their dog Damaro needs to send us a pic.
Oh,
put him in a little cardigan. Send it our way.
I love it. Absolutely love
Damaro, what'd you do on the rug?
Yeah, right. Exactly. There we go.
Oh, George just lost all his privileges, unfortunately.
There it is.
So let me read off some more of these films. I interrupted myself because I remembered Gravity Falls and how great it is. This was a show. I actually watched the TV show of this more than I watched these movies. But the movie Highlander did not make money at the box office. It was a $19 million budget and a $2.9 million. Did you guys ever watch Highlander?
No, I never have. I heard of it, never saw it.
But that actually reminded me of another movie. I don't know how much money it made, but it didn't really spark a whole lot of buzz. But I think it has like its own kind of group, so to speak, is Zoolander.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Because they ended up making a sequel, and then that actually reminded me. Do you remember the movie Mystery Men?
Oh yeah. Yep.
I mean, that's another movie. Like, I absolutely love that movie where they're trying to hold off like auditions, like who's gonna fit in their group of superheroes. It was like, oh my gosh.
What was that movie? The Catalina wine mixer. Was it Brothers? What was that movie called? With the two, it was
John C. Reilly and
Yes.
That was Step Brothers, but I never saw
Step Brothers.
that. Is it good?
Oh, it's hilarious.
Oh, I gotta watch it.
That's a good one.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh man, it's fantastic.
I think people forget. I saw an advertisement the other day. This is again a '90s thing, but there's this transition from the '90s into the 2000s, and I think people forget a little bit. Like Jim Carrey, Ben Stiller, those guys were like the foundation of comedy. And, I mean, what's the guy's name who did Superbad and?
Seth Rogen.
No, I was thinking of Judd Apatow. But yes, Seth Rogen's a part of that team, right? The Judd Apatow team. The Judd Apatow team
was part of Heavyweights. That was.
Was he really?
Yes.
Oh no way! I didn't know that. That's awesome. So Ben Stiller and Jim Carrey were like, I mean, staples of comedy in the 90s, right? Like I don't think we really, I think the generation right now is celebrating more so like the Will Ferrell, because he came out of like the end of the 90s into the 2000s, kind of more like and he's done some great films too. I'm not trying to disparage him at all. He's amazing. But Ben Stiller and Jim Carrey, I mean, I saw an advertisement for The Mask the other day. I don't know. And I don't know if The Mask made money, so I don't know if it's a cult classic, but my friends and I would quote The Mask all the time, dude. Like we would just be quoting all of the lines and doing all of the things from The Mask. So I would say that's kind of a cult classic for me, for sure.
And that was a superhero kind of movie. Ish. Back
it was
then.
in that genre. Yeah, it was in that.
Yeah.
You know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of Dick Tracy, where it's this like larger than life, like cartoon come to reality almost.
Yes. I used to love Dick Tracy.
Real life moment of The Mask in real life, and this is no kidding. Like literally, I was reaching in to grab my wallet, and I ended up pulling out a condom, and I said, "Oh, sorry, wrong pocket."
Oh my gosh. You guys made me think of this for a second. What was I going to say?
That made you think of something.
not that specifically. The mask was making me think. Oh, Dick Tracy. I have a funny story about Dick Tracy. I guess it is actually a little bit related to what your story just was. My nephew, the 9-year-old that I was just talking about, he got this watch for Christmas where he can make phone calls off of it. I'm like, oh, you're like a little Dick Tracy, man. And he's like, who? And I'm like, Dick Tracy, dude. He had a watch that you can make phone calls on. And then I hear him, he puts the phone a little bit away from his mouth, and he turns to his parents and he's like, I think Uncle Jay is using a curse word, like a swear word. And I'm like, no, Dick Tracy's a name. Like, it's not like a curse. I'm not using it in that context. That was really funny.
That's hilarious.
I don't know where he got that from, but that was pretty funny.
That is hilarious. That was a Touchstone Pictures movie, but it was Disney. Disney owned Touchstone at the time. Yeah. But that was interesting. They tried to do the Dick Tracy thing. I don't think it did really well in the box office.
Yeah.
And then it just fell off. And I wouldn't even say that one. We're talking cult classics. I don't even think that one's cult classic, because even the young kid, he 9 years old, had no idea, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it really fell off. Like that franchise.
The Rocketeer didn't do that well in the box office either. And so I think that there's this, I wish somebody would revive the Rocketeer. Come on. Like, how would you not revive that film?
In this day and age, it's like it's a superhero-ish kind of thing. It's kind of in that Captain America era and everything.
Dude, it's so perfect for this. Yeah, if you could do the Rocketeer, that'd be a fantastic deal. And if you could figure out a way to make Dick Tracy, because Dick Tracy was, a comic book back in the day, or a comic strip, I should say, back in the day, I believe. But the idea behind these larger than life gangsters with this larger than life like PI who like tries to figure, no, not really a PI, he's more of a detective because he actually works for the police force. But that would be, I don't know, man. That'd be a killer film. I'm trying to think of IPs that I should write screenplays in to try and sell. So maybe I'll write a Dick Tracy screenplay. Maybe that'll be my next thing, or a Rocketeer screenplay. Is what I should do.
Yes. Now with Dick Tracy, would you go? Now we're kind of going off the beaten path here a little bit, but I'm kind of curious because you're a creative mind, Jay, and I'm kind of curious, like what direction with Dick Tracy would you go in, like the Penguin route? Like that show, The Penguin?
I 100% would. Okay. So I think what the mistake they made with Dick Tracy is that they did not know if they should make it for adults or kids, and they aired on the side of adults, but then tried to sell it to kids.
Yeah.
So if you watch that film, there's a lot in that film, which, by the way, has phenomenal actors. Has Warren Beatty, Al Pacino, and who's the other one? I'm forgetting the guy's name. The guy that was he played Rain Man in Rain Man against Tom Cruise. What's that dude's name?
Dennis Hoffman. No.
No, you're close. You're close. You're close, George. You're really close.
Oh, good.
Come on, George.
It's there. Yeah, it almost like rhymes with that or something. I'm just like trying to think of it in my head, but it's very close to that.
Why can't I get it? I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, like an Oscar caliber actor. The guy's amazing. Oh, Dustin Hoffman.
Dustin
Hoffman.
He's in it too. So Madonna was in it. Madonna played the love interest in that film. So I think that what they did was they went a little bit too dark with it. But what I would do is just go crazy dark with it. I'd just make it say, hey, this is an adult film. Like this is, adult film. maybe not that crazy.
Now you're speaking my language.
Yeah. No, but I think that film could be awesome. But the Rocketeer, if I were going to write a Rocketeer script, I would write that more for families.
Yes.
I wouldn't write that Dick Tracy, I would write it for more like adult oriented.
I would agree with you. And a Rocketeer family, like MCU family, or would you go a little bit more
MCU family for sure? Yeah, that's a perfect example. If you made the Rocketeer and you did it like like you said, the first Captain America movie, it's in the same era, right?
Yeah.
If you did it like that, I think you could. If you had like James Gunn behind it, you could probably get into a little bit deeper of themes, which would be kind of cool for the Rocketeer to do. Those would be phenomenal franchises to bring back.
Amazing. And that's the kind of stuff I want to see the Walt Disney Studio live action division do, instead of just remaking their old animation. Why don't you lean into some of these creative, like the Rocketeer, or or new IPs, but in that same vein,
Yeah. Well, and this is the thing: a lot of cult classics are getting remade today, right? So if you go through like we talked about Labyrinth. I mean, Robert Eggers signed on to do. Was it Labyrinth or was it the other one? I might be getting it wrong. I thought it was Labyrinth, but he signed on to do either Labyrinth or what was the one that was the Tom Cruise one? Also started with an L. I don't remember. I'll come back around to it. I'll figure it out. Because David Bowie was Labyrinth, and that was a Jim Henson thing as well. And you guys are right. There was Jennifer Connelly was in that. Yeah. Why can't I remember the other one? Somebody in the chat, somebody in the comments will have to remember what the Tom Cruise one was. I almost had it, but I don't have it. But a lot of these, like another one that brought up was Clue. Do you guys remember Clue?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Clue was I liked Clue as a kid, man. I thought it was really funny. Clue brought up The Thing. John Carpenter's The Thing was brought up several times.
Yes.
I mentioned
Rocketeer, like even Tron.
We talked about that.
Yep, we talked about when you were glitching, we were talking about Tron. but another one is Willy Wonka, which has just been remade, right? Yeah. Willy Wonka was one that didn't do well in the box office, but was for sure one that became huge later on. Donnie Darko was brought up. It's a Wonderful Life. It's a Wonderful Life is a staple of Christmas, and it did not make money at the box office.
That's crazy to me. That's absolutely crazy to me.
We already talked about Blade Runner, but Blade Runner was remade. We saw Blade Runner 2049, not remade, but continued the storyline. Wizard of Oz Wizard of Oz was a budget of $2.1 million. Its initial gross was approximately 2.3.
Oh, wow.
And that Wizard of Oz has had a career. I mean, Wicked is just blown up the box office recently, right? And nominated for Oscars and stuff.
Oh, absolutely. So, that Wizard of Oz story reminds me of like what Disney has done a lot with their stuff, like where it didn't do well initially, but that franchise has made its money over and over and over again throughout the decades.
Yeah.
Just
100%.
Buckets of money.
It did exactly what Disney did.
Yeah.
So George...
Another movie that a lot of people probably, we do because we're movie buffs. Older movie, like black and white, back in the olden days. I love 12 Angry Men.
Oh,
Yeah.
one of my
Fantastic
favorite
movie.
movies.
Yeah.
I love
Great
that
movie.
movie. Absolutely incredible. I saw that for the first time ever in high school, actually. It was one of those days where, you know what, the teacher would bring in a movie because I forgot what it was. We didn't have work, like stuff to do that day or something. So they just bring in a movie to watch. And that was the movie the teacher brought in. And I was captivated, bro. That was like such a good movie. I absolutely love it.
A lot of those films back in the day, before we started recording, George brought up Citizen Kane as well, which did not do well at the box office, but now is considered one of the best movies of all time. And it's really, really interesting to watch a lot of those old films, especially if you're thinking about filmmaking, because you can see how film transformed as a medium from being like something that is like a play that we just put on film, and then going like, wait a minute, we can do things with film that plays can't do on stage. So we should try those things. Citizen Kane does a bunch of those things, like all in one film, which is crazy. But a lot of the Alfred Hitchcock stuff, they come out and do things that you'd never be able to do on a stage. Wizard of Oz, of course, couldn't do a lot of that stuff on stage. So it's a really interesting to watch some of those old films. But I mean, even the films that you could do 12 Angry Men on a stage. You could easily do that, but filming it in the way that they did is fantastic. It's absolutely
Great
fantastic
movie.
film. Yeah.
Great movie. And then you have films like Pollyanna, right? Which I don't know how that did in the box office, but it kind of has lived on with like, I wouldn't call it a meme, but like that now Pollyanna has become a term you would refer to people of being like overly optimistic. Like you're being Pollyanna-ish.
That's right.
Right. Yeah. So it's like that movie kind of has lived on in that kind of way, kind of similar to like more modern examples of that would be like Office Space, where like the film didn't do that well in its initial run, but the memes and the references have lived on. Yeah. For years and years. So yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Haley Mills, by the way, speaking of Pollyanna, what a gem of a human being. I love her.
Oh my gosh. She was in a movie. She was in M. Night Shyamalan's Trap.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
She's in it. She doesn't have a big role, but she's in there, and I could not believe it. I was like, is that because you kind of see her off to the side when you very first see her? I'm like, is that Haley Mills? That's like I haven't seen Haley Mills in the movie in like I don't know how many years.
Well, it's funny that OG and I got to see her like live. And speaking of Clue, also Leslie Ann Warren, they both came out on stage and they sang the Let's Get Together for the Richard Sherman tribute at D23.
No way.
And I have to say, both of those women, honestly, for their age, they look really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jay, I'm telling you, I lost it. I lost it when Haley Mills walked out there. Let's get together.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Do you think that could be considered a cult classic? Because I mean, they remade it with what's her name?
Lindsay Lohan.
Lindsay Lohan. Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that would be. I don't know what the original made box office wise, but I would say so. I would say it's a cult.
So too.
I think a lot of those older, like it's particularly like the older like live action Disney films, like The Parent Trap. You had mentioned Pollyanna. You have In Search of the Castaways and all that.
Callaways. Is it Callaways?
Wait.
With the ducks? Is that what you're talking about?
There is one that's is it just the Castaways? There is the Callaways. I do know what you're talking about.
Okay.
There is a Callaways and Castaways.
Gotcha. I think we're
Blackbeard's Ghost.
Oh yeah, Blackbeard's Ghost.
Like, I mean, you just go back to all those films, and it's like, do we like when we watch it? It's that nostalgia. It's like, oh, this is just a really good movie. It's like, do we really care at this point? Like, what it made at the box office, because it's like it ran its run, and it's basically making it up through the nostalgia purposes. Look how we're having this conversation right now about talking about all these movies that apparently isn't supposed to have relevance, but they do because they ended up becoming cult classics.
What about Swiss Family Robinson? Did that make a profit at the box? I loved that movie when I was a kid.
Oh, me too. I don't know how it did in the box office, but that was a great film. Absolutely great film. I love that era of Disney live action. I mean, and even films like the Ugly Dotson with
yeah.
Flechette.
Yeah.
I met her one time. One time I met her. It was actually in the early 2000s, and she looked. She's no longer with us now, but back then, I mean, she looked really good for her age. I mean, she aged well. Absolutely.
That's cool.
Absolutely. But yeah, she was awesome in that movie. Who was the gentleman, George? I know you know Dean.
Oh, Dean. Oh my god.
The guy from Herbie.
Yeah, the guy in everything. He was in everything back in the day.
Wait a minute.
And that darn cat.
Yeah. Wasn't he in like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang or something? One of those, like, or maybe it was just Flubber, Son of Flubber. All those movies.
Dean Jones.
Dean Jones.
That guy is a Disney. That guy's got to be a Disney legend.
Now
right?
here's a
how is he not a Disney legend? He's got.
What's funny is he played Dr. Varnick, the villain in Beethoven.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. He was in every Disney movie at a certain point. That guy was like,
he was like in everything, like in that period of time. But OG, just to clarify, it's In Search of the Castaways, and the other one is Those Callaways.
There you go. Thank you, George. Thank you, George. Yeah, so I got my lines crossed.
Yeah. Well, George, I don't have any further questions. Do you have anything else you want to bring up? I mean, this is a walk down memory lane into some things that were just impactful to us, some things that we just liked, but also some actual cult classics that didn't do well at the box office. But
I mean, honestly, a lot of the movies that we brought up were on my list, like from The Princess Bride, Labyrinth. You had even brought up Clue. Like those are like movies that, like, whether they're Disney or not, and it's just like when we go back to it, we don't really think about, again, like what revenue it was bringing in. We just see it as the film itself, and I feel like that film should not define of how much they're bringing in of what makes a good film or not.
I agree. Now, I do have one thing to add, Jay, before we get out of here.
Yeah.
The queen of the cult classic, Molly Ringwald.
Oh, dude, for sure.
She is the queen of the cult classic.
Yes. You know, that's another, we brought this up earlier as a part of the conversation, but that's another example of it. The teen movie was not just a teen movie back in the day. It was still for adults as well. Like they found a way to kind of include all of those things. And Molly Ringwald was kind of John Cusack. What is his last name? I know his last name. He was really popular in that era too.
Pretty much the Brat Pack.
Yeah.
That's what they call it. Anthony Michael Hall.
Emilio Estevez.
Ali Speedy.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just fantastic stuff. Rob Lowe.
Emilio Estevez, because I don't know if you guys brought this up because I was out for a few minutes, but you mentioned like with the 90s, the Mighty Ducks.
Oh, Mighty Ducks is huge. Yeah.
I mean, like with Emilio Estevez, it's like, I mean, even though I feel like I prefer it in that order, 1, 2, and 3 of how I like enjoy them. But I mean, as a whole, I mean, you can definitely have appreciation for them.
Oh yeah, and that's part of that genre. The Kid in King Arthur's Court, Angels in the Outfield. That genre they don't do anymore, really.
Cool Runnings.
Cool Runnings.
Dude.
Cool Runnings.
Cool Runnings was so good.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Great stuff, guys. Great stuff.
All right, gentlemen. Well, that was really fun. OG, why don't you tell the folks where they can find you?
You can find me right here on Orange Grove 55 on YouTube. You can find me on Instagram, Orange Grove 55, and you can find me on X, Orange Grove 55. And Jay, I want to thank you so much for being a fantastic host. And really good conversation. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll come back. George will have another idea soon, or we'll go talk about Pinocchio finally.
Yes,
that would be really fun too. George, where can the folks find you?
Absolutely. You can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Disney George. You could also find me on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky under the Disney Italiano. And of course, you can find me on my home base on Orange Grove 55 with Citrus Corner with all that sweet, juicy, but sometimes sticky Disney news and info. And please definitely give a check out to my new YouTube channel, Citrico Central.
There it is.
Just go follow him. George is a walking cult classic. I feel like he's still in his prime, but he's also a cult classic. You can find me over on How Stories Work with Jay Sherer. I'm breaking down either scenes or films over there on that channel. So if you want to learn alongside me as I break all of those things down, there's my favorite movie of all time is Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I just did 2 videos on Raiders of the Lost Ark. One is about how perfect Steven Spielberg films Indiana Jones's face reveal, and the other video is literally about 1.99 seconds that I talk about for 7 minutes. But it is a piece of action where Indy first uses his whip and why that action is filmed so well by Steven Spielberg. So you can go check those videos out, How Stories Work, or you can find me here on Orange Grove 55. In fact, I'm promoting Weba's show because I'm going to be on Weba's show as he releases it this Saturday. You said OG is coming out? Yeah,
we record on Friday, drop Saturday. Yep.
Perfect. So everybody check that out as well. Weba's going to do an amazing job hosting us on that. I won't spoil what it is. You should tune in and watch it. But yeah, thanks everybody for joining us, and leave your favorite cult classics in the comments down below, and we will respond to them there. Thanks for joining us, guys.